What's up, guys? George D here, and today we're going to take a look at the major scale. What's the major scale? Well, if you look at the chromatic scale, which is all 12 notes, we're going to pull 7 notes from that to form a more functional diatonic scale, or 7-note scale. This is really the scale that's at the root of music. We use this to form chords and intervals and all the things that make music what it is. And thanks for subscribing to my channel. This is just one of many lessons that I have planned, and I'm excited to teach you guys. So, without further ado, let's dive in and take a look. So if you take a look at my whiteboard over here, you'll see that I have a diatonic scale starting with a C. We can play the scale in any key, but we're going to start with a C because the key of C doesn't contain any sharps or flats. In fact, the key of C is the only major scale that doesn't contain any sharps or flats. Also, keep in mind that every major scale is going to contain one of these notes. You're never going to see a major scale with two A's, like an A and an A sharp. It just doesn't happen, and you'll get a better understanding of why in a minute. Now, what I want you to pay attention to in this are the intervals, or the distance between each note. We're going to be measuring this in what are called half steps and whole steps. In the chromatic scale, everything is a half step, and since we pulled 7 notes from that scale, some of our intervals are going to be whole steps, or 2 half steps. So, if we take a look at the key of C, C to D is a whole step, D to E is another whole step, E to F is a half step, F to G is a whole step, G to A is a whole step, A to B is a whole step, and B to C is another half step. Now, this order of whole steps and half steps is going to be your template for every major scale. It just happens to be naturally occurring in the key of C. But whether you're in the key of E, F sharp, D, it doesn't matter. They're all going to have the same intervals with whole steps and half steps in the same places. Learning this is fundamental and incredibly helpful once you get to minor scales, modes, and the rest because they're all derived from this scale. So the order that you're looking for is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. An easier way to remember this is half steps between the 3rd and 4th note in the scale and 7th and 8th. So in the key of C, things look really clean because it's a perfect scale. There are no sharps or flats, and if you were to play this scale on the piano, you'd be playing all white keys. But what if you wanted to play this scale, say, in the key of G? Well, let's write it out and take a look. So we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F, and back to G. Now, in order for this to sound like it did in the key of C, we'll need to place our whole steps and half steps in the same place. So in the key of G, our half steps are between the 3rd and the 4th note in the scale, or between the B and the C. And between the 7th and 8th note in the scale, or between the F and the G. The B and the C are already a half step, so we're okay there, but the F and the G is a whole step when it needs to be a half step. Let's start from the beginning of the scale and see how we can fix it. Okay, so G to A is a whole step, so we're okay there. A to B is a whole step, so we're okay there. B to C is a half step, so we're okay there. C to D is a whole step, so we're okay there. D to E is a whole step, so we're okay there. E to F. Since these are the 6th and 7th notes in the G major scale, this should be a whole step, but it's actually a half step. And then if you look at the F and the G, this should be a half step, but it's actually a whole step. There are a few things that we can try to fix this. If we were to bring the E down and make it an E flat, it would fix this half step problem and make it a whole step, but it would create a half step here and create a different problem. So what we're going to want to do is bring the F up and make it an F sharp. Now we have a whole step here, so that fixes that issue, and a half step here between the F and the G, so that fixes the other issue. Therefore, the G major scale has 1 sharp. This is called an accidental, or a problem in a scale that can be fixed using a sharp, a flat, or a natural. Okay, so let's take a look at what this looks like on the guitar in the key of C. And I want you to think of this in terms of intervals instead of just memorizing the scale. So C to D is a whole step. D to E is a whole step. E to F is a half step, which is hard to see because we're switching from the E string to the A string. But if you look at it on one string, you'll see that it's a half step. F to G, which is a whole step. G to A, which is a whole step, A to B, which is a whole step, and B to C, which is a half step. So you can take that scale and move it down, and you'll notice that you're playing the same exact shape. So you can move these scales around and essentially play any major scale, and that's why, because you're playing the same intervals no matter what key you're in. So in the key of G, we have G to A, which is a whole step, A to B, which is a whole step, B to C, which is a half step, C to D, which is a whole step, D to E, which is a whole step, E to F sharp, which is a whole step, and F sharp to G, which is a half step. So because the half step, whole step layout is the same, the shapes are the same. You can play it in the key of A, key of A sharp, key of B, key of D, and so on. So let's take a look at this in the key of D. So we'll write it out. And we'll mark our half steps. So we can see right away that we have a few problems here, but let's start at the beginning and work our way through. So we have D to E, which is a whole step, so that's okay. But then E to F is a half step when it should be a whole step, and F to G is a whole step when it should be a half step. So we're going to bring our F up a half step and make it an F sharp. So that fixes those. Then G to A is a whole step, so that's okay. A to B is a whole step, so that's okay. Then B to C is a half step when it should be a whole step. And then C to D is a whole step when it should be a half step. So again, we're going to bring our C up a half step and make it a C sharp. And then that fixes those. Now everything looks good, and you can see that we have two sharps in the key of D once we make changes to fit our original whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half template. Let's keep going so we can really get this. All right, so now the key of A. Let's write it out. And mark our half steps. Okay, so let's start at the beginning again. A to B is a whole step, so we're okay there. B to C is a half step when it should be a whole step. And then C to D is a whole step when it should be a half step. So we're going to bring our C up a half step, making it a C sharp. Then D to E is a whole step, and we're okay there. E to F is a half step when it should be a whole step, so we're going to bring our F up a half step, making it an F sharp. But then that creates a problem with our next interval, so we're going to bring our G up a half step, making it a G sharp. And then that creates a half step in our next interval, which is what we're looking for. So I'm sure by now you can kind of see how this works. Each key has a different number of accidentals depending on these intervals. Okay, so the last one we're going to look at is the key of F. So let's write it out. And let's mark our half steps. Okay, so again, let's start at the beginning. At first, things look okay. F to G is a whole step, so we're okay there. G to A is a whole step, so we're okay there. But then A to B is a whole step when it should be a half step. And we can't sharp the A because it would create a problem with our previous interval. So the only thing that we can really do is bring our B down a half step and make it a B flat. That fixes this interval, making it a half step, and then also the next interval, making it a whole step. Then C to D is a whole step, so we're okay there. D to E is a whole step, so we're okay there. And then E to F is a half step. So something that you're going to want to remember is that A sharp and B flat are the same note. This is called an enharmonic, and you can see why we use different names in different contexts. You'll learn more about this as you learn more about theory. And that's it for major scales. What I recommend that you do is you spend a little time each day just writing these out, and before long, you'll know just off the top of your head, oh yeah, the key of A has 3 sharps, C, F, and G. And thanks for subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions, like my video and leave them in the comment section below. I'll be happy to answer them. So keep practicing, and I'll see you next time.